to The Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others. Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Studios, Rochester, New York, mouth off at RockVox, rockvox.com. Having enjoyed an almost 40-year career facilitating his own authentic brand of the helping conversation, your host, Executive and Recovery Coach, Keith Greer.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, as always, for taking the time to sit in on this episode of The Helping Conversation. I have had the privilege over my 40 years of doing some different types of helping work to spend a lot of that time working with teens and their families. And I often ask adults the following question when I do trainings or I'm speaking to groups around the topic of working with teens or living with teens. And I will often ask adults, if you could do your teenage years over again, but you would have to experience them exactly as you experienced them the first time, would you? Now, a few people will kind of raise their hand and say, yeah, I had a really good experience. Most people say, no freaking way. If I had to experience it exactly as I experienced it the first time. It is a challenging time of life. For the teen, it's an incredibly challenging time of life for parents of teens and those that care about them. And so today we're going to spend this episode talking about some of the work that is going on in my area, in the Rochester, New York area, around trying to engage and understand what our teens and young adults need and are looking for in terms of services and supports to move their life forward. This is an incredibly important conversation. A couple of years ago, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation published some research they had done on the current state of adolescent wellness. And there were a variety of recommendations in there about what we need to do to support our teens and young adults. But one of the recommendations, one of the points they made in the research is the historical, seems to be reality, that the world of practice, so research into practice, the world of research, just what do the researchers tell us is going on, and the world of legislation, that those three worlds never talk to each other. They don't cooperate. They're never in the same room. And what the impact in this case is on teens and service provision for teens and young adults and families from that reality that these three camps just don't talk. They don't sit in a room together and say, how do we take all of the expertise that exists in each of these camps and put it together? So let me share with you what we're going to talk about today, a recent survey that was done in our area. So the survey is entitled Calling All Youth and Young Adults Aged 12 to 24, and it was created by the Consortium of Alcohol and Substance Abuse of the Finger Lakes, Region 2, and it's their adolescent subcommittee. For those not familiar with this consortium, they have been around a long time, and they have always done some wonderful, wonderful work in the area of education and advocacy. The purpose of this survey was to gather information surrounding evidence that suggests youth, their families, and friends are experiencing difficult times, traumas, challenges, etc., without seeking help or guidance. The survey looked at how youth view connection, what traits they look for in a trusted adult, and what services they would like to be able to access in their region. Through this survey, KSAS hoped to gain better understanding of the struggles that youth face and include the youth voice in the decision-making and service delivery in both professional and community sectors in their counties. And so let me introduce to you our guests today who were behind doing this survey, and they're here with the results and their thoughts and some recommendations for us to consider as communities as we think about what do we need to do to really support our teens and young adults. So let me introduce to you first Margi Taber. Margi is employed by Wayne County Department of Mental Health as the Community Schools Liaison for Behavioral Health. Her role is an active partner and liaison between the school, behavioral health programs and community, providing leadership for the collaborative process and development of a behavioral health continuum of services for children and families. She is certified as a youth mental health first aid instructor. She is a CASAC 2 and a life coach. Her work is about leaving a transformative imprint, causing a ripple effect that promotes positive change. Margie, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Also, let me just say, it is so nice. We were talking before we came on the air that we're actually in the room together. At least two of the three guests are here, and how nice that is. So let me introduce to you Aubry Ball. Aubry is the Youth Engagement Specialist with the Monroe County Office of Mental Health. She is a peer specialist that works to promote youth voice in the various child-serving systems across Monroe County. She facilitates the Spreading Wellness Around Town Youth Council, which is an advocacy group for young people aged 14 to 24 looking to make a difference in the system they have had direct involvement with. These systems include public schools, juvenile justice, mental health, Department of Human Services, and foster care. Aubry, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And then last but definitely not least, we welcome into the room, so to speak. He's with us on Zoom, Jason Teller. Jason has been working with people who use drugs and their incredible families for the last 19 years, and it's the only thing he's ever done professionally. He is a graduate of SUNY Geneseo, go SUNY Geneseo, as well as a proud father and stepfather to amazing and resilient children. Jason states that he has been lucky to work with the Monroe County Office of Mental Health for over 4 years now, focusing on assuring those impacted by addiction and their families that they have their needs met. This includes access to multiple pathways of recovery, one of which, harm reduction, is especially important to him. Most of all, Jason states that it is his mission to foster community, empathy, and compassion for families suffering with addiction and mental health issues. And Jason, thanks for being with us. All right, gang. So fill us in a little bit on this survey that you did. Maybe a little bit of how it came about, and then we can dig into what it told us. So I'm going to leave that to any one of you who'd like to maybe get that started. Right. Right. Yeah. Right. 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 Yeah. So the survey was for you surveyed youth 12 to 24, right, Margie?
Yes.
And one of the things I'm really curious about is how, especially in this last year of COVID, how you made the survey happen.
Well, we launched the survey in January. We spent quite a few months putting it together. We wanted to be really mindful. We had the survey questions be reviewed by teens across the region so that they had their input on the questions. And, I think it really was about getting their voice and what their needs are specific around their own emotional wellness,
right,
around substance use disorder. And I think from my perspective, having spent a lot of time in and around the field, is I've seen a lot of programs that put programs together and then want the young people just to show up and attend. And then they don't. And for years, we've been hearing at meetings, we're not getting referrals. We're not getting referrals. Well, you know what? Something needs to change. So, the KSS Adolescent Specialty Committee is pretty gifted at wanting to do projects and to really be progressive and ask those hard asks.
Yeah.
So we put this survey together, launched it in January of 2020, and we closed it, I believe it was April.
Right.
We circulated it we had a lot of different organizations that are represented at our committee, and we circulated it via social media, email exchanges. It went out to numerous folks. And I believe we were able to get 495 responses.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
And if you take a look, it's a 9-county region.
Right.
And so it really was important to not just focus it as well on the, Monroe County, the suburbs and rural areas, but also to capture what's going on in the voice for those youth in rural counties.
Yeah. Which we know, just across the board, whether we're talking about youth or adults, the dearth of available services out in the rural areas it's always been a huge issue. So you surveyed 495 youth, or at least 495 youth and young adults responded. And so let's dig into what they said. So one of the first key findings is that youth trust each other to be the experts. So what's that tell us, and what do we need to think about from a standpoint of service provision, Aubry, when we read that first key finding?
Yeah, I think it's pretty common sense when we start to break it down, is young people talk. They have friends, they have peers, they have cousins, they go to school. They talk to each other. And a lot of times they don't feel safe having difficult conversations with the adults in their lives, worried about, are they going to have to do something with this information I'm about to tell them? Are they going to be accepting if I tell them something serious about my mental health or my substance use? I really don't think it's a big deal. I've got it under control. But they can kind of be more real with their peers, with their friends, and they can go to them, trust them, ask for advice. And really, that's what they told us in this survey is, I want to learn from my peers. I want to be able to have those conversations and feel comfortable doing that and educated doing that.
Right. So then I guess one of the things that immediately pops into my head is, and we kind of mentioned it earlier, we're guilty of years and years and years of creating youth programming, but it was us adults creating it. So how do we, within the reality of the systems we work in, bring in that youth voice in, here's what we would like some kind of service or program to look like? Yeah.
I think this is my bone to pick with the system itself, right? Is this tokenization of our young people and saying, okay, here's the program I want to deliver. Here's what I've already gotten approved by the executives, by the administration. Right. Here's what we have funding to do according to this grant. Tell me you like this. Tell me you're going to attend.
Yeah, right.
I want to say that I have the stamp of approval from young people after having made these decisions. And I think everybody can read the room and know when something isn't realistic and when you're just telling me what I want to hear. And I think young people have a special gift in that and a lack of a filter, which I think is a great thing. And saying, you're feeding me BS right now. I really don't want to be here. I'm really not going to attend after you just asked my opinion when you already decided what you were going to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it begins with a transition of a cultural transition of, do we believe that teenagers can tell us something that we buy into?
Right.
Like, do we actually trust them? It begins with this intrinsic trust of, like, the thought of a teenager can change a company.
Right.
And I don't know if many companies necessarily believe that. And it comes from even like parenting, right? Like, so I'm a parent of 5, and I'll still catch myself like, you're a kid, you don't know what you're talking about.
I know best.
Like even in the household circumstance. So it's a big cultural shift to buy into that teens really know what the heck they're talking about. No different than, any other group of people that know whatever that is best, right?
Right.
So teens should know, in theory, what teens need, just like a person that plays professional basketball. Like if they're asking basketball questions, they should reach out to the people playing professional basketball.
Right.
So but it's a shift, and I think it's not uniquely American, but we still, really treat children like children for a really long time.
Right.
We don't give them as much responsibility. There's other cultures in the world where 14-year-olds are running households.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh my God, you're going to tell us like we should have food in group, even though we've always been anti-food, or, that you can only have clear drinks in our group room. And we're saying, well, just let us have a Monster, let us have caffeinated things. Like even like basic things like that, I think are looked at almost with like astonishment. Like, I'm supposed to listen to you saying caffeine should now be okay in our program.
Right.
Even though, you know what, caffeine in a program probably isn't like the hill to die on, right?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
if teens are telling you, listen, if you just let us drink and eat in here, like, and I'm not saying that's what teens would say, but if they were, like, programs have been historically just resistant to something as simple as that,
Right.
where they could just, if that would improve their attendance and, ultimately their retention,
Right.
and ultimately lives of people that
kids.
are suffering in the community.
Right. Look, I think that piece about the I'm sitting here thinking how guilty I am of this still in my life with my 29 and 28-year-old, right? Of some sense of I know best, right? Because I'm your father and I'm the adult, and I have two incredibly competent adult children. But also that piece you said, Jason, I've seen this in so many systems. We pick these places to have a battle with teens. And you have to look at that and say, what the hell? Like, why are we battling that other than I think I can? Because I'm the adult. In 30 years in public ed, I saw that just all over the place. So I wonder what are some of the, if change were to happen here around this, it sounds very much that a lot of the responsibility of the change would be on us adults. So what do we need, we being community, people who run organizations interested in youth, what do we as in the adult world need to do? What's the shift?
I just want to pipe in and say a couple thoughts I have. I think it's really about changing perspective and being open to think outside of the box. When I think about giving youth voice, are some of them going to come up with like just really wild thoughts or comments? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's what, some of them might actually be really good. But I think the other piece, what we're doing is we're saying your voice matters. You matter. And we're empowering them to really just tap into their own sense of who they are and share what they have to offer. And I think that's where gold nuggets can come from.
Right.
And I think when we don't empower young people, what have we really taught them to help bridge them into adulthood? The other thing that I think about with this project that kind of stemmed our motivation from this as well is taking a look at what are the gaps that young people need right now.
Right.
And if they are going to their friends, have we as a community, as a culture, educated and prepared peers to be able to be responsive in a way for their friends without them taking on the burden of the outcome?
Yes. Yeah. So, I love that you said that, because one of the first thoughts I had when I was reading this first key finding is, okay, so I'm going to, I'm going to go to my peer and I'm going to unload something in my life that could be traumatic or difficult. Well, now all of that responsibility is on the other peer, the other teen. And I love what you said. And in my head, Margie, I start thinking, how can we help teach teens to be coach-like? Right, to maybe not feel like I have to fix my friend or maybe even give advice, but just the power of presence and listening and safety. So that would be just such an awesome thing that we could teach teens. So is there anything that you see going on, Aubry, in that area that would allow us to, if this is reality, that kids go to kids, and we've always known that, to give those kids some extra added skills in playing that role.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a number of different programs related to just what we're talking about here. The Mental Health First Aid Organization is coming out with the Teen Mental Health First Aid curriculum.
It is. Awesome.
They're trying to launch that in schools, and it's kind of neat. There's a lot of huge influences supporting that movement. It's funded by Lady Gaga's nonprofit organization, which is always a cool thing when you have people who are influential in young people's lives backing that sort of thing.
Could you give a quick definition of what mental health first aid is? Because I don't know if necessarily all of our listeners know that concept, because it's been so powerful in the adult world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mental health first aid is just like CPR, but for your mental health. So noticing signs and symptoms of what to look out for when there might be a crisis, and then how do you effectively respond in that scenario? What can you do in that moment to help that person make it through the crisis in one piece? You know, whether that's, you're the professional who's capable of doing it, or you're the professional who's going to connect them to someone else long-term to address those mental health needs.
Right. Do we know when the adolescent version is going to be launched?
It is launched.
It is.
It has been piloted. I was part of that about a year, pre-COVID. And actually, there is a grant that was received by Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES to roll out the teen mental health first aid through the Wayne Finger Lakes BOCES in the region.
Right.
So, I think the key thing for me around the mental health first aid is, so there's the mental health first aid, which originated in 2000 out of Australia. And then I think it was like around 2012, it came to the U.S., or 2008, something like that. Anyway, I get the numbers all mixed up. But anyway, it's been here for quite a while, and we've had a really strong platform in Monroe and Wayne counties and Yates County even to present mental health first aid. So there's mental health first aid for adults who are interacting with adults, the youth mental health first aid for adults who are interacting with youth, and then there's the teen mental health first aid, which is starting to be launched for teens to participate. The recommendation is that it is administered through school. So it's incorporated in a class.
Right.
It's a shorter version, but the idea behind the teen model is that it gives the teens some language and a sense that they're not responsible for the outcome.
Right.
A sense of who to go to for supports if they have a friend or they themselves are going through challenges. But also, it's an opportunity for the teens to become aware of their own emotional wellness as a check-in.
Right. That's awesome. That's so needed. So needed. So I want to just ask a question and highlight something. So in this first finding that 61% of youth said they go to friends when they are having a tough time. Should we feel positive about the fact that 54% are able to go to their parent or guardian? I was a little surprised that, at least for me, that stat was as high as it is. Good thing, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a positive thing. Again, this is a small sample size.
Sure.
So, we could, I think we have to have some acknowledgement that when you are using a technology-based survey, that there's certain groups of people that wouldn't necessarily have as easy access to it.
Right.
So we probably, could, in the future, doing this kind of work, being assured that we're reaching a more diverse population.
Right.
So I think that's one aspect of it. But yeah, I think it's a good thing that people are, listening to or willing to go out to reach out to their parents. What I will say is that, like, parents are fixers. So I'm a natural fixer, right? So, like,
yes, we are.
My fiance will tell me I'm a natural fixer. Everyone, everyone that knows me will. So, but I've noticed with kids, and listen, Aubrey's the much better youth expert than I am. But what I observe with youth is that they're not trying to fix each other's problems as much. Like, so you talked about this listening concept. Yeah. They're better listeners than me. I'm trying to fix my daughter's problem.
Yeah.
Where can I take her? What can I do? What, all these kinds of things, versus sometimes kids are just really like, man, that sucks.
Yeah, that sucks.
That sucks. He broke up with you and you're really sad about it now. versus I'm like, do you need to talk to someone? Is this a week we need to schedule your session with your counselor? So I think that kids almost have these innate abilities already that almost you lose as an adult, because like you have to fix problems, like not to any fault of your own as an adult, like they just come about that you have to fix them.
Right.
So it's a natural tendency. And what I always try to say, and Margie kind of said it before, is that like, we're not doing this well right now.
Right.
Like, we're doing our best we can to serve kids. And I think we do a significantly better job in some systems like mental health, maybe even than we do in substance use. So, it would be an argument for these organizations and adults to have if they were just kicking butt and having great outcomes and teen suicide rates weren't up and all these kinds of things. Like we're not doing it well. So from my perspective, anything that could possibly make it go slightly better is worth giving a go. And if that is, turning some power over, because I think like Margie said, it's empowering youth.
Yeah.
Adults have to accept that there is some disempowerment from the adults
we need to shut our mouths.
Organization. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because you weren't knocking it out of the ballpark right now. And that's just, and no one's knocking it out of the ballpark in treatment. It's a really hard thing to do. But, we could always be doing better. And, I think kids have really good ideas.
Yeah. So your key finding number 2 is, and we've talked about this a little bit, youth want a voice in decisions that impact their lives. So, and I know we might be guessing here, but if we had a small group of the youth who responded to this survey and asked them, all right, like where in your life, in all the different contexts you exist in, would you like a greater voice? Because, we've been talking mostly about, programs and treatment and the professional world. Aubry, what would our teens tell us? Where else maybe do they feel like, hey, guys, can you listen to me a little bit?
Yeah, I think point blank, schools.
Yeah.
I think at home, especially in their own families. But I really do think it comes down to those places and systems that serve them, where they go for help, where they go after school, wherever that may be. Those are the places that they don't necessarily feel heard. There's the expectation for them to go, for them to talk to their therapist. Maybe they discuss a treatment plan. Maybe they just sign off on a treatment plan and don't really know. But when I think for anyone, when you have investment in something, you want to put in that work.
Right.
You want to be more involved. You want to see a better outcome. So if we take a step back and we allow youth advisory boards to happen authentically and genuinely, we establish these places for young people to have a conversation about, there's no red tape in this room.
Right.
There's no limits to these ideas. What can we do better to support you?
Right.
And having that conversation and genuinely hearing them and listening to them, and then going to try to make those decisions and then trying to implement that feedback, it's gonna provide a better outcome. And I think it's a hard conversation to have with providers.
Yes. Because
everyone gets into this field for a reason, whether it's your own experience or a loved one or a friend, or you're just really passionate about helping people. That's what you're trying to do. And I think this conversation is so hard to have because people get defensive.
Yeah, right.
And they say, well, look how far we've come. Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Yeah, right.
But is that the place where we stop, though?
Right.
So just being open to that and not being defensive and throwing those rules out and just hearing what comes up.
Yeah. I was just, I had the opportunity this past week, earlier this week. So I'm the president of my faith community, and I always go by the age of my kids. So, about 15 years ago, we had a weekly youth group. 40 kids showed up every time, every week, every Wednesday for the whole year. And that ain't happening in our community anymore. And our community has shrunk just in terms of the number of congregants and things like that. But we finally, some of us put our heads together and said, okay, kind of what you're saying, Aubry, we don't know. We clearly don't know because we're not getting kids involved. So we've had now 2 meetings with youth and to listen to them. And I find it fascinating because, I kind of have been a part of it as the president, right, of the congregation. And I have said to them, we really need to hear from you. Like, we don't know. We don't know. If we knew, we'd have all sorts of kids. We don't know. And what's fascinating, I found in this meeting conversation this week, we got wonderful ideas from them. And I'm also looking at their faces. And I can see they have no belief whatsoever that we're going to turn this over to them, right? That sooner or later, the adults are eventually going to say, here's what we're going to do. And I've had some very direct conversation with some of the folks within my congregation who play this role with youth. That has to stop. We have to legitimately and sincerely and transparently ask, help us, because we don't know.
Yeah.
I think oh, go ahead.
Okay. I think that's the key piece right there is listening and then following up.
Right.
It's great to feel listened to, and it's great to feel heard, and maybe I'll attend more if I do feel listened to. But ultimately, when I see that you're hearing me and you're going to implement those things,
right.
I trust you now.
Right.
I want to come back.
Right.
And, I've been involved in other surveys too, where we had some opportunity for young people to write direct feedback, and just the things that you read of just, no one's going to read this. Nothing's going to be done anyways.
Yeah.
You're going to still get your paycheck. I mean, you feel that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah.
I think as the adults involved, there needs to be a level of humility and acknowledging that we don't know it all. You know, I mean, I've been around 35 years working in some capacity with youth, and you know what? I'm always learning something new. And I think the reality of it is youth today, their modes of communication and connection are different than 20, 30 years ago. Things are digital. When I was 16, you couldn't wait to get your permit because that's how you got out of the house. And nowadays, I know a lot of young people that they're not running out to get their permit when they turn 16.
Yeah, right.
And technology is, they're connected way differently. And I think I want to respond to Aubry's Youth Advisory Board because I love that concept of it. And I think the humility comes into it needs to not be like, okay, we have our token youth on the Youth Advisory Board.
Right.
And it makes me think of, early on when I got exposed to recovery, the saying that you would hear, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. The idea that someone coming into recovery or, entering sobriety didn't know what they were doing, so they needed to just be quiet. I think as adults, that's kind of the mantra we need to adopt.
Yeah.
We need to listen, pay attention, and really, truly hear what they're saying.
Yeah. The other one of those, Margie, I always loved is your thinking got you here.
Right.
So empowering and respectful, right, when we would say that to people struggling with substance use disorder.
Right.
Even if you think about substance use disorder treatment, it came from that foundation of AA.
Yeah.
I am the expert. Mm-hmm. You are the infant.
Right.
And I will tell you how to live your life now. And when you listen to me, your life
right.
will improve.
Right.
And we built an entire system based on that
yes, we did.
concept. And so, and along with abstinence and stuff and such, versus those are really hard conversations to have with someone who's 16, 15 about this concept of, lifelong abstinence and this demand of this path that you must take for. It's really hard to do when you're 35, I would imagine, and 45 and 55. It's probably even harder to think about the next 70 years of living a life that way. And that's where we have seen some providers move into a harm reduction space with kids or with youth and be more permissive and malleable in what recovery looks like for them with multiple pathways.
Right.
But I think the perception is that treatment is still one way.
Sure.
Like publicly, the perception is that you go to treatment, they tell you what to do, you better stop using drugs or alcohol, otherwise you won't be successful. Even though, I like to believe that treatment providers have become more malleable and more open to multiple pathways. Certainly the system that funds them, at least, verbalizes multiple pathways in OASIS and has a harm reduction, unit of their organization now, because it is a big ask for someone to commit to never using substances again in
Yeah.
their life.
Yeah.
When substances have been pretty effective for them, like
Yeah.
whether we like it or not, when you use drugs or alcohol, they kind of do what you're asking them to do.
Right.
Lower your inhibitions, make me not think about something, whatever it may be. And when you're a kid, I mean, geez, like, it's a very sensible
Yep.
way to think about things.
Look, we've
when
also,
you have
us adults, once again, back to us adults, us adults have made this conversation with teens, especially around their use of marijuana, way more complicated than it was in my day, right? Because now us adults are the ones who are out there legalizing it. And us adults are the ones who are saying we can now use it for every ailment under the sun. And yet we also know, that if we're going to just talk about this one, that, the marijuana being smoked today is a very different animal than the marijuana I was smoking in the 1970s. So it's just we've made it a more confusing conversation. And then we don't honor with teens the fact that we've made it a more confusing conversation because they now come back at us, I used to say as, these wonderful jailhouse lawyers with all of their case. But I'm curious. I wanted to ask this, so I'm glad you brought it up, Jay. Because I'm doing some work with the new Recovery High School in the county, and we've talked about this. So, and I'm totally with you that we've had just too many generations of this very rigid definition of recovery, which is kind of inpatient, outpatient, 12-step adherence, and total abstinence for the rest of your life. So, what does harm reduction? What are some of the forms of it that we're starting to think about in working with teens, specifically around this issue of substance use?
I mean, I think that if we think about harm reduction, it is what it says, right? That like when you get in a car accident and wear your seatbelt,
right?
That's harm reduction. You're still going to get in the car accident, probably still going to even get injured, but you might not die.
Right.
So when we're talking with teens about drug or alcohol use, and when we're thinking about the concept of prevention and treatment, when we think about harm reduction, is that it's really hard for adults to admit that there might be a safer way for a kid to do something unsafe.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to accept, like as an adult, especially because many adults are parents, and how the heck could we say to our kid, like, yes, there is a safer way for you to consume marijuana.
Right.
There is a safer way for you to drink alcohol. And there's safer things that you can do after you ingest those things. Those are really hard conversations to have because as adults, we tend to see any harm reduction as permission.
Yeah.
That I'm giving you permission to do this thing that's kind of dangerous. Not kind of, in some cases, is very dangerous. We can't pretend it's not. And having some comfort with that. And because we think that every kid's just going to go out there and just do it because they kind of were taught a different way. And colleges have already done this, right? When I went to college, which is, even way after when Keith went to college, when we had conversations about alcohol, it was still pretty much don't drink.
Don't drink.
Like that was the conversation. Now, if you go to SUNY schools at their orientation, they're like, these are the things you can do when you drink that might make it safer for you as a young woman specifically, or something like that. That's a way different conversation. So they're already moving. Our cultures are trying to move in this direction of harm reduction. But yeah, once you start talking about a 13-year-old, everyone gets so scared that, now that, or not just because marijuana is legal, but, even when it wasn't, there's 13-year-olds who do it.
Right.
And how do you have a conversation with a 13-year-old that's like, I would prefer that this wasn't something you did on a very regular basis. But if you continue to make that choice, here's what it looks like that it can mitigate the damage it does.
Right.
I have discomfort in it myself.
Sure.
I still know it's the right thing.
Right. Because what's the alternative?
Discomfort.
The alternative is, as we have all been saying, kids aren't coming to us. So those kids are all out getting high anyway, and they're not talking to anybody about it who might be able to engage them in a thoughtful, respectful conversation that, one, honors their autonomy, that at the end of the day, they're going to make a choice. Maybe we teach some adults a little motivational interviewing skills, right? So we help people do that. And if we're not going to be willing to do that, we all know they're all out there getting high with no guidance whatsoever from maybe some adults in their life who could interact with them in a respectful way.
Yeah, and my thoughts as Jason, as you're talking, are, part of the risky behaviors, isn't that part of adolescent development?
Was for me.
The expectation is, we're going to push the limit at some things. And I'm not saying I'm condoning drug and alcohol use, but at some level, there's part of it that's part of the territory. And I think the other thing that I think can be controversial at some level professionally, and I don't think we talk about enough, is that in order to access treatment, you need to be diagnosed with a dependency.
Right.
There's young people that are being diagnosed with dependency when in all actuality, it's a phase of life.
Yeah.
And it's, this phase that they're going through, and maybe it's their current environment or their culture, and that's, the only coping situation they have at that moment. But regardless, I think back to people I know that, in their 16, 17 years of age, they would have definitely met the criteria for dependency. And, today in their 40s and 50s, they're not. So, I think that we have to really have that conversation that, I don't want this to come, I'm going to say once an addict, always an addict. But, I think we have to be mindful of the labels that we're using with young people.
Very much so. Look, even the one thing I think of that around that, Margie, is from a diagnostic standpoint, right? So we are now allowed to diagnose substance use disorder, mild, moderate, and severe. And when I look at the DSM criteria, the diagnosis of mild, that's a very different person than the person who meets the criteria for substance use disorder severe. Yet we have this history of throwing everybody into the same treatment group, giving them the same treatment. We don't do that with any other disease state, right? Like we do differential diagnosis. And we just even that, I think sometimes, can we just look at, because the other thing I was thinking of when you said that, I don't know what the stat would be in real life, but I think if you walked onto any college campus and you gave every student on that campus a substance use disorder assessment, I'm thinking at any given moment, probably 80% of them could meet the criteria for some diagnosis. Yet, as you said, we know 5 years after graduation, the addiction rate will be, that 10% that we've always assumed it is. So, yes, we need to just be so much more thoughtful. And Jason, you said about how do we separate doing this conversation with kids and not having other adults perceive it as we're giving them permission, right? I used to say that when I was working at Webster, I used to always say to kids when I was talking with them about their substance use, especially if it was a kid that I'd been working with for a while and we had a really nice relationship, I would often say, you know what, kiddo, if I had as someone who cares about you, as an adult who cares about you, if I had a magic wand, I'd wave it over your head and have you not using, because I believe that's probably the healthiest thing for you right now. I don't have that magic wand, so let's talk about what your thoughts are about your use. And I have always found teens to be brilliant and insightful and thoughtful, and none of them are going to say to you, listen, I'm really dying to become addicted, like it's my goal here. They're just coping, right? As you said, Margie, they're just coping with an incredibly difficult time of life. They found this mechanism that we all know works for all of us, at least a little bit for some of us. And we can do good harm reduction conversations with them that honor them and honor their decision-making. Have you found that, Aubry, in your work with teens?
Absolutely. And this whole conversation makes me think of, what we talk about in youth mental health first aid as well is, are you really going to convince someone to complete suicide if you ask them if they're thinking about it?
Right.
You're not.
Right.
Are you really going to convince someone to start using substances if you ask them about their substance use and have a real conversation? No.
Right.
I always grew up hearing, oh, I give you an inch, you take a mile. Okay, that's life. That's what happens. And is that really the worst thing? Probably not. But if we're really looking to that as a reason why we're not willing to have these conversations, we're never going to get anywhere. Young people are doing these things. They're having these conversations. And are you going to trust them to figure it out on their own? Or are you going to provide them some safe ways to do it if they choose to do it?
Right.
Young people are very steadfast in their decisions that they make, and I appreciate them for that. When they know they want to do something, they're going to do it.
Right.
So let's have them do that in the safest way possible. because they're going to go and they're going to say, hey, this is what works for me right now. The depression medicine makes me feel like a zombie.
Yeah.
How many times have we all heard that?
Yep.
This works for me. And right now, I don't know anything else that works for me. And I don't know that I'm going to make it to tomorrow if I can't find something that works.
Right.
So have that conversation, learn about it, hear about it, and then see what you can do and what comes of it.
Yeah.
I'm looking at one of the recommendations that came out of the survey. Increase skill building to teach youth how to seek out help and resources within the community. Like, how empowering would that be if we had a language that was communicated in a way that empowered young people to really just have open conversations, to be able to determine for themselves what might be the next step. And I also think that we lose out on not focusing on providing young people better tools to navigate life. We lose out in that some are getting lost in the shuffle and are going to end up taking that dive into the full-blown addiction, which could have potentially been prevented.
Right.
See, I see this as focusing on services for adolescents as prevention.
Yeah.
You know, we want to call it treatment because that's how the organizations get paid, call it treatment. But in essence, it's preventing.
Yeah.
It's preventing young people from, you know, like they say, digging that deeper hole, and diving in.
Yeah. So one of the other key findings I wanted to ask you all about is youth find connection through school and school-related activities. So I have to put a bias on the table right here, you know, as a retired 30-year school social worker. There are times that I still feel like the community puts way too much on schools of what schools have been asked to take on above and beyond teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. Yet there's another part of me that says, where better to do it than maybe a school, which is often seen as a hub within a community. So how do you interpret that finding, and how would we operationalize that in a way that would work for youth? Jay, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I really think it starts early on. So what we've learned through the ACEs studies, the Adverse Childhood Experience studies, that kids that have a trusted adult in their school setting have better outcomes.
Right.
And we tend to hope that those occurrences happen naturally, that a kid is going to meet Keith at 12 years old, think Keith's cool, and now I'll be able to reach out for Keith for the next 6 years.
Yeah.
When really we should be, these are, the way I think is that we should be fostering those connections early on.
Right.
That making them, making those introductions to a kid that someone knows a fair amount about. That's just all there is to it. Like you said, schools are involved in kids' lives. They see a certain kid, this kid might get along really well with so-and-so. Build those connections right away. And I'm not saying force them, but facilitate those connections so that the kids can have them.
Right.
And some of them will happen naturally, and that's fantastic. They may happen with a coach, they may happen with a teacher, they may happen with a counselor, they may even happen with someone in administration. But for many, it may not happen, in a very natural, authentic way. So how do we help facilitate them? And do it so early on.
Yeah.
We want kids to, I believe that school is a safe place and primarily a safe space. And I never won't believe that, even though bad things can happen there.
Right, we get it.
That's the way the world works. But I want my kids to want that experience, that they want to go to school, that they feel engaged in that school community, that they belong there in some way, shape, or form. And I think that happens through connection.
Yeah.
That's where, and I'm not the expert at fostering connections in the school system.
Right.
But I would like to think that they could work on making those connection efforts happen way sooner.
Right.
When a kid is 13 or 14, or when something crappy happens.
Right. Right. That's what I was thinking.
If we can be more proactive than responsive, and I think that's what the ACEs studies have taught us, is that we can we know kids coming into kindergarten have 4 ACEs. We know their parents are divorced. Maybe we know dad's in jail.
Right.
Maybe we just know through reading news articles and that, mom has mental health problems. So right there, that kid has 3.
Right.
We just need to put our
Connect.
arms around that kid in kindergarten and say, there's already some difficulties here. And I think that's a lot of kids. And I think that's what school's overwhelmed about. They're like, man, like my kids have 3 aces, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
Just off the jump. So I think schools are like, man, that's going to be like dang near all of them.
Right.
And it may be.
And it may be.
And that's okay.
Right.
That doesn't mean we can't do the work.
Yeah. Look, it then moves into that conversation, I think, which is a very challenging conversation for that system of where are we spending all of our time with our students, with maybe a little less focus on the academics and a little bit more focus on, making the time for that connection. So Aubry, if you were talking to whether it's school people or any adult about ways of being that they need to think about if they really want to create a trusting, safe space in their interaction with youth, what would your words of wisdom be?
Yeah, so I actually just had this conversation last night with the SWAT Youth Council, and we were talking about just the authenticity of it.
Right.
Am I going to care if someone says, hey, how you doing? If they're just going to brush me off, or I've never had a conversation with them before, or someone pulls me into a social worker's office and I'm uncomfortable? Probably not. I think the reality of what we're looking at is a much more nuanced conversation than what it was a year ago.
Right.
These results came out in April. Was there a huge number of young people who said school's important to me because they lost that?
Yeah.
Was that all of a sudden more important to them because they didn't have it? And now they're like, you know what? This is actually working really well for me. This is more flexible to me. I don't feel like I'm a number in a system here. It's hard for us to know. So I think it's important when we approach these things is to just ask, what do you need from me? What would be helpful to you in this moment? Should I sit here and be with you?
Right.
Or should we look at signing you up for something? Maybe I'm not the person you want to share your life story with, and I hear you, but know that there's always someone out there for you.
Right. And it sounds like, and this goes back to something that was said earlier, that maybe one of the skills we could teach adults is to not jump in to fix it. Right, which we tend to do as adults, or that child sitting in front of me reminds me of my own kid, and I'm fixing versus listening and witnessing and holding this space. And I wanted to just one of the questions in the survey was, what qualities would you look for in a trustworthy adult? So one of the things we know that our youth are looking for are adults who are reliable. To me, that means you show up when you say you're going to show up, are safe, and that could probably mean a lot of different things, I think, for youth, and respectful of our opinion or perspective, right? So that, our kids are telling us what they need. So you have a lot of interaction, Margie, with schools. What's your sense of, going back to what Jason just said a moment ago, what's your sense of where schools are at this given moment in themselves rethinking how they interact with their students?
I can speak from the perspective of what's happening out in Wayne County. So they have a community schools model out there that really has been a platform that, through collaborative efforts with the schools, some community-based organizations, the Wayne County Department of Mental Health, under the direction of Jim Heights, that have come together to really build this platform where social emotional learning is really at the forefront. Right. And they keep building on it each year, which is actually kind of what inspired me to switch and move out there to work in Wayne County. But I think the more that we can build a platform where we are providing tools and skills for our young people to be in touch with their emotions,
right.
Which also requires adults to be in touch with their emotions, which I think as adults, a lot of adults are not good at.
Yes.
And I want to respond to the idea about fixing. One of the things that I try to reflect on today is that our young people don't need to be fixed. They're not broken.
Right.
That's our stuff if we think we need to fix them. Right. So, what I'll do many times today in my life is if someone's bringing up something, I'll ask them, what are you looking for from me? Do you want some advice? Do you just need me to listen?
Right.
What kind of response are you wanting or needing from me at this point? But I think the more we can get out of the idea that people need to be fixed,
right.
It's just so disempowering.
Yes.
But I think schools focusing on the social emotional learning and really just embracing the idea that we have an opportunity to help build a toolkit for young people to deal with life.
Yeah.
You know, I think about my high school, my school experience. It did not that I think it's totally school's responsibility, but I think there's a way in which education can be presented in a creative way to help people learn how to navigate the twists and turns of life.
Yeah, no question. Yeah, you know, one of the topics we talk about on this podcast a lot is this creation of trust and safety in our role as helping people. So I just also really wanted to highlight that one of the other outcomes from your survey, you asked the question, have you or would you ever avoid asking for help during a tough time for any of the following reasons? And number one reason was fear of feeling judged and embarrassed. And so once again, that puts the onus on us adults who want to be in a really good helping conversation with teens and youth to think about that, to think about, is there any message we give, like maybe I need to fix you, that could lead a teen to feel like, ooh, dude, you're not the one I want to talk about. Anytime I'm in this conversation, I think about Sheila Berg. So I was in high school, as Jason pointed out a few moments ago, many years ago, and I struggled. I struggled through high school with a variety of different things, and Sheila Berg was a social studies teacher in my high school. Now, you have to remember, this was 1973 to 1977, so the knowledge base on the part of teachers in those days around substance use disorder and mental health was not very high. But what Sheila knew is I was struggling, and she befriended me. I barely passed her class. She was one of the hardest teachers I've ever had, but she was the teacher who I remember to this day that I remember she saw me, she cared about me way beyond what I did in class. She did it in whatever way she did it, because again, her level of sophistication around this topic is nothing like today, but many years later, she stands out in my head and heart whenever I'm in this conversation. So we know the power of an adult playing that safe, supportive, I care about you, I see you, I respect you role. So as would be expected, this was not enough time for us to have this conversation as I'm looking at the clock. So let me just go around the room, and I'll start with Aubry. Last thoughts, suggestions, recommendations you would make to folks out there who would like to be their best in helping our teens and youth move forward.
Yeah, I think I want to convey the message that young people know how hard we work to support them, and they can see the folks that really do want to do that. And, you know, I hear all the time, oh, God, I would never want to be a teacher. They don't get paid anything, and they got to teach me, and they got to do this stuff, and they don't get it. And I understand why they don't get it. They don't have the time. So going in and just trying to be yourself, bring yourself to that conversation. Right. You don't need to bring the modules. You don't need to bring your training. You don't need to bring your stuff at home with your own family to that conversation. Listen, hear them out. And if you're going to do that, just make sure you have the time to.
Right.
If you're showing up to that conversation and you're going to leave and not follow up or say, oh, yeah, I'll do that, you just made the situation a lot harder for the next person who's going to approach that young person.
Right.
And so I'll say that all day long. Be yourself, be authentic, and show up.
Right. What do you think, Margie?
Piggybacking on that, you don't need to be a professional. You don't need to be professionally trained in anything. Young people need all of us, and they just need us to be human and caring.
Right.
And I think when I first started teaching youth mental health first aid 5 years ago, we were promoting that research said that young people need a trusting adult to help navigate into young adulthood.
Right.
Today, they're saying 3 to 5.
Really?
So I think there's the relevance of helping to be a bridge, building community for young people to help them navigate their pathway into their adulthood.
Yeah. Well said. Jay, last thoughts?
I think much of this comes from a conversation of privilege. Like, if we think that a person of privilege, like my kids, need 2 to 5 adults, imagine what someone from a Black and brown background may need.
Right.
So I think, we always want to make sure that when we're having these conversations, that mine at least comes from a place of privilege. My children, even my school district,
right? I hear you.
All come from a place of privilege, and I don't think the same. It's not equitable.
Right.
And so how do we even address those inequities? And I think we address them by listening to those kids too.
Yeah.
Um,
And that topic alone could be a whole nother conversation, right? About the inequities in the healthcare system. Yeah. Well said.
Can I just add one
go ahead.
point? The report that we did was developed from the survey by CCSI, and it is uploaded on the NCAD website, ncadd-ra.org. And if you go to resources, you can find the full report as well as the one-page overview if anyone wanted to see the survey results.
Awesome. And I will make sure whatever platform you happen to be listening to this podcast on, all of that information will be in the episode notes. I just wanted to close by saying, one of the perspectives I always try to hold in all of my years of working with teens is that I was in their life for a very specific, probably pretty short period of time. And given the complexities that often they walked in with, I never had any sense that I could fix that or make that go away. But the responsibility I always felt is, can I give this child a positive experience with a helping adult? Because maybe if I do that, somewhere later in their life, and they're going to say, I had a decent experience with that social worker person. Maybe I'll seek somebody else out. And I just remember always being very aware of that maybe is, for those of us who work with teens, one of the gifts that we can give is, as you said, Aubry, be present, be real, and let them have an experience with not being told what to do. And being respected and, again, treated with full autonomy. Margi Taber, Aubry Ball, Jason Teller, thank you all so much. Thank you for producing this survey. Thank you for all the work you have done and continue to do in our community. It is so needed, and it is good to know that there's folks out there who are challenging the systems to also grow up and be different and evolve. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Shalom.
Shalom. So I hope this was helpful for folks, thoughtful. And if you're somebody out there who cares about teens, loves a teen, works with them, I hope something that we talked about today that you might be able to put in your toolkit as you work with this population who, as much as they say they turn to each other, they need good adults in their life. And I've always found in my work with teens that they'll admit that they know that I'm just a kid, quotes around that, just a kid. And it would be nice to have some from trusting adults that I can turn to. There's just some ways of being that we need to adopt if we're going to be that specific and very special adult in the life of our kids and teens and young adults. So I hope you are able to join us the next time as we continue to shine a light on the skill and talent of those individuals that invite another into that compassionate, complex, and intimate space called the helping conversation. Everybody take good care of yourself.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the Helping Conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. For more information on Keith Greer and this podcast, log on to keithgreercoaching.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation.